Hey dear viewers, Detective Brooks here. Today, I will tell you the story of Lauren Heyke, a 29-year-old woman from Phoenix, Arizona. Her life became a vivid example of how fragile human existence is and how quickly everything can fall apart. Lauren was a beautiful soul with expressive green eyes. She had an unwavering belief in the goodness and sincerity of people. However, it was her very trusting nature and openness that led to the young woman's untimely demise. Lauren Heyke was born in November 1993 in Seattle, Washington. She grew up in a well-off family. Her father, Jeff, owned a plumbing business, while her mother, Lana, worked in real estate. Lauren had a very warm relationship with her older brother, Ryan. Lauren moved to Phoenix and enrolled in the Gary Manuel Aveda Institute, where she studied to become a cosmetologist and skincare specialist. The young woman always took meticulous care of her appearance and had an excellent understanding of cosmetics, so her education helped her develop her natural talents. Lauren began her career at the age of 18 and quickly achieved success. At first, she worked as a customer support representative. From 2015 to 2020, she held the position of a leading manager at the well-known cosmetics company Benefit. Then, for 9 months, she worked as a cosmetologist in a beauty salon. In October 2020, she took a job as a manager at the Center for Aesthetic Medicine. In addition, Lauren planned to follow in her mother's footsteps and try her hand at real estate. At the time of the tragedy, she was working full-time as an instructor at a golf club. Lauren was never afraid of challenges, was remarkably responsible, and easily found common ground with people. She actively developed her skills in the beauty industry, sports, and real estate. The young woman diligently watched her physical fitness, regularly visiting the gym and generally leading a healthy lifestyle. Lauren had a wide circle of friends and a loving family that always supported her. In her free time, the young woman engaged in beneficial activities. In addition to work, sports, and meeting up with friends, she loved traveling and hiking. It was her love for scenic trails that made Lauren fall in love with Phoenix. The young woman often took solitary walks, listening to music on her headphones and enjoying nature, fresh air, tranquility, and peace. Her favorite route was a trail in the northern part of the city, not far from her own apartment. There was hardly ever anyone there. Naturally, Lauren's parents were very concerned about her solitary wanderings through deserted places, but Lauren herself was convinced of her safety. Every morning, she thanked fate for another day lived and boldly set out on a walk. As her loved ones recounted, Lauren had a distinctive morning ritual. Upon waking up, she would drink coffee, chat with family and friends, and then go for a walk. The young woman did this every day, believing that such a start guaranteed a positive mood for the whole day. Unfortunately, she had no idea that her trusting nature and carelessness could play a fatal role. On April 28, 2023, everything began as usual. Lauren drank her coffee, talked on the phone with her loved ones, and then went for her usual walk in the northern district of Phoenix, not far from her home. Her route passed through a picturesque trail in a quiet, sparsely populated area. The one-way journey took 15-30 minutes. The young woman left home around 10:30 a.m. The last time security cameras captured Lauren was at 10:52 a.m. The footage shows her walking carefree along the park path. The beautiful young woman was dressed in a pink sports top, black leggings, and sneakers. She only had her phone and keys with her. No one ever saw her alive again. Lauren was supposed to show up for work at 11:30 a.m., but she neither arrived nor notified anyone about being late or absent. This was uncharacteristic for the extremely responsible young woman. Colleagues tried to call her several times, but to no avail. Lauren's phone was turned off. Worried friends inundated each other with messages on instant messengers, hoping to find out if anyone knew about the young woman's whereabouts. But no one knew anything, as she had not been seen after leaving home that morning. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Lauren's anxious parents, who also could not reach her, drove to their daughter's apartment. They hoped that the young woman was just feeling unwell and therefore did not go to work. However, she was not at home either, although all her things remained in place. The doors were locked, with no signs of a struggle or robbery. It seemed as if Lauren had gone for a walk and simply not returned. Without wasting a minute, the family filed a missing person report with the police. Law enforcement officers immediately began a search, but it did not yield quick results. That day, April 28, it was sunny and warm in Phoenix, as always. Unfortunately, there were hardly any people in the park where Lauren was walking. If someone had been passing by during the attack, perhaps the tragedy could have been avoided. But this did not happen. Lauren was last seen alone on her way to the park. after which the young woman disappeared and did not answer calls. All day, law enforcement officers and concerned citizens actively combed the surrounding area and park in search of any traces of the missing woman. They looked under every bush, checked every corner, and questioned everyone they met. But all efforts were in vain. Lauren's family nurtured the hope that perhaps the young woman had simply gotten lost, been delayed by some business, or spontaneously gone to visit friends in another area of the city. They incessantly called her, sent messages. But there was still no news of Lauren's whereabouts. With each passing hour, hope faded and fear for the young woman's life grew. Her parents, brother, and friends were beside themselves with anxiety and despair. It all resembled a nightmare. But the next morning, April 29, around 11 a.m., the worst happened. Lauren's body was accidentally discovered by a passerby, a woman walking her dog nearby. She immediately recognized the young woman, as she often walked this route. Just by the trail, in the bushes, the dog sensed something horrifying. Upon approaching closer, the woman saw Lauren's bloody body. Without wasting a second, she called the police. Law enforcement officers promptly arrived at the scene. A terrible sight unfolded before their eyes. Lauren's lifeless body lay just 3 meters from the trail in the thicket. It was covered in numerous stab wounds. The young woman lay on her back, her arms limply spread, her clothes torn and blood-stained. Everything around was drenched in blood. Forensic experts immediately set to work. According to preliminary conclusions, death occurred on April 28 around 11 a.m. from blood loss caused by deep stab wounds. The body had 15 wounds, most likely inflicted with a folding knife. The wound in the back area was fatal. The nature of the injuries indicated that the attack and murder lasted for some time. The wounds were located in different parts of the body, with varying depths and shapes. The injuries on the young woman's hands indicated her desperate resistance. Deep cuts on both sides of her palms evidently appeared when Lauren tried to grab the knife blade, deflecting it from herself. The police realized that the young woman had fought for her life until the very end. But the attacker turned out to be remarkably strong and aggressive. The attack took the victim completely by surprise. Scratches on her back, shoulders, and torn clothing allowed them to assume that the criminal had crept up from behind, knocked Lauren off her feet, and begun inflicting stab wounds. Then he turned the young woman onto her back and continued his bloody rampage. At the crime scene, a clear footprint of a sneaker, size 42-43, was found, presumably the attacker's footwear. A thorough examination of the surrounding area showed that during the violent altercation, Lauren had desperately tried to save herself. She crawled, tried to hide in the bushes, but to no avail. Bloody trails stretched for several meters from the young woman's body, testifying to her final and so unequal struggle. The poor girl called for help with her last ounce of strength, but unfortunately, at that early hour in the deserted park, no one was nearby. A few meters from the site of the tragedy, another testament to Lauren's desperate desire to survive, was found a fence with barbed wire, which she had apparently frantically tried to climb over. On the sharpened edges of the wire, pieces of torn fabric and traces of blood remained. Experts suggested that the numerous abrasions and scratches on the young woman's body appeared precisely during the attempt to overcome this obstacle. Nearby, Lauren's personal belongings were found: her phone and apartment keys. Evidently, they had fallen out of her clothing pockets during the fight with the attacker, but neither a wallet nor other valuables were found on the deceased. This immediately allowed them to rule out the version of a murder committed for the purpose of robbery. The young woman's mobile phone was broken. The last incoming and outgoing calls were dated the evening of April 27. That is, for almost a day and a half, there had been no news from Lauren. Further thorough examination of the area allowed forensic experts to come across another important find. Among the branches not far from the body lay a bloody folding knife, the probable murder weapon. The blade and handle of the knife were covered in fingerprints and other DNA traces belonging to an unknown man. Fragments of hair and epithelial cells that could have come from the killer were also seized at the crime scene. The body of the deceased and all the discovered physical evidence were urgently sent for examination. In parallel, investigators began carefully studying the footage from surveillance cameras. Fortunately, one of them captured Lauren entering the park at 10:52 a.m. The young woman was alone, wearing headphones, listening to music. Nothing suspicious was noticed. But literally a minute later, the silhouette of a tall, slender man in dark clothing flashed across the recording. He ran very quickly past the camera as if trying to hide his face. Despite this, experts managed to discern that it was a young African-American man wearing a baseball cap. His height, build, skin color, and clothing elements all matched the description of the person whose traces were found at the crime scene. Another camera located near the park exit captured the same man literally flying out from around the corner, looking around at 10:59 am. Then he tries with all his might to climb over the fence, but his clothes get caught on the spikes. In the end, the perpetrator simply jumps over the fence, loses his cap in the process, and disappears in an unknown direction as fast as his legs can carry him. These video recordings became the first glimmer of hope for the investigators, and although the identity of the criminal had not yet been established, law enforcement now had a clear description and identifying characteristics of the person to be found. Interestingly, the time of the mysterious man's appearance in the park, according to preliminary expert conclusions, almost exactly coincided with the time of Lauren's murder. That is, the cameras captured the probable killer immediately before committing the crime and right after it. A thorough analysis of the video recordings, a frame-by-frame examination of each second, revealed several more important details. First, the suspect moved in an extremely purposeful and fast manner, constantly looking around as if afraid of being noticed. Second, he appeared in the park literally half a minute after Lauren, apparently following her. And after committing the crime, the perpetrator rushed to flee, away from the park entrance, climbing over the fence in order to disappear from the scene as quickly as possible. All this confirmed the theory that the murder was intentional, planned, and quite possibly far from the first on the perpetrator's track record. He acted quickly, brazenly, skillfully covering his tracks. And yet, in the heat of the escape, he made a few unfortunate mistakes that allowed the cameras to capture him, at least partially. The surveillance camera footage was immediately shown to Lauren's relatives and friends. Unfortunately, none of them could recognize anyone familiar in the man in the frames. Of course, everyone was stunned and deeply saddened by this tragedy. The family could not believe that someone could deliberately, with particular cruelty, take the life of their kind, bright girl. Lauren had no enemies or conflicts, no debts to her name. No valuables or large sums of cash were found on her. She did not lead a risky lifestyle. Therefore, the versions of murder for personal reasons or for mercenary purposes had to be discarded. A week after the tragic events, a press conference was held, at which representatives of law enforcement agencies spoke. They informed the public about all the evidence found and asked for help in identifying the suspect. Lauren's father, barely holding back tears, begged everyone who had any information to report it to the police. Relatives set a substantial monetary reward for information that would allow them to track down the killer. Lauren's story shook the entire city. Thousands of concerned citizens responded to the call. People spread information on social networks, organized search groups, and volunteered. In parallel, painstaking work with physical evidence continued. DNA traces, fingerprints, and other biological materials were thoroughly studied in a specialized laboratory. The persistence of the experts finally bore fruit. The genetic profile of the suspect matched the data contained in the police database. The system issued a name Zion William Teasley, a 22-year-old African-American who had several prior convictions. Detectives immediately set about studying the identity of the possible criminal. It turned out that Zion was raised in a dysfunctional family. His parents abused alcohol and drugs. The young man's problems with the law began in childhood thefts, hooligan antics, threats. In 2020, he was convicted of a series of armed robberies. After serving almost a year behind bars, Zion was released early for good behavior. He was last arrested in January 2023 for an assault with a knife on a random passerby. But then the victim withdrew the statement, so Teasley got off with a suspended sentence. At the time of Lauren's death, Zion was under the supervision of law enforcement and had to regularly check in at the police station. He last appeared for the mandatory check on April 27, a day before the tragedy in the park. Armed with this information, the detectives began to devise a plan to apprehend the suspect. Round-the-clock surveillance was established on Teasley. It soon became known that at that time, he was not working anywhere and practically never left home, only rarely visiting a store or meeting with some dubious characters. Having obtained an arrest warrant, the operatives went to Zion's apartment. They had to break down the door, but there was no one inside. During a thorough search, the police came across a bucket with bleach, rubber gloves, and rags. It seemed that the suspect was trying to destroy all traces of his involvement in the crime. Fortunately, he did not have time to complete the task. In Teasley's room, they found a suitcase hastily stuffed with clothes. Right there lay a brand new passport in someone else's name and bus tickets to Canada. It appeared that the young man was planning to flee the country in the near future. Investigators suggested that Zion had learned about the search and decided to hide from justice. A large-scale special operation was launched. Orientations on Zion Teasley were sent to all states. The Border Service was warned about the need to detain the murder suspect. Patrols were on duty at train stations, airports, and major highways. Detectives carefully tracked calls from the fugitive's phone, determining his location by cellular tower signals. At the same time, investigators did not stop gathering evidence. They managed to find several witnesses who had seen Zion Teasley stalking Lauren on the eve of her death. One woman noticed him loitering near the young woman's entrance, as if waiting for her. Another man had seen the suspect in the same park a couple of days before the tragedy. A thorough study of Zion's past showed that this was far from the first case of his attacks on members of the weaker sex. A month before Lauren's murder, Teasley was detained for harassing some patron of a nightclub. And even earlier, a girl he was dating had filed a statement about being beaten by him. However, the case was closed at the time due to lack of evidence. By all indications, Zion was an extremely unbalanced, aggressive type. He openly despised women, considering them inferior beings. His posts were found on social networks where he called them the worst words. And also on the suspect's pages, they discovered photos with knives very similar to the murder weapon. Investigators made the assumption that Lauren had likely become a random victim of a maniac. Zion may have seen her on the street, followed her, and then attacked her in a secluded place. It's possible that something about the girl provoked his morbid aggression, her attractive appearance, carefree attitude, headphones in her ears. Experts say that types like Teasley sometimes perceive female vulnerability as a trigger for attack. Lauren's relatives were shocked by the brutality and senselessness of the crime. They couldn't believe that someone was capable of so inhumanly taking their daughter's life just because she went for a walk. The girl's father made an impassioned public appeal. He urged everyone to refrain from any attempts at vigilante justice and allow the police to act within the law to punish the perpetrator. Finally, 3 days after the manhunt was announced, Zion Teasley was apprehended. He was hiding in a dilapidated garage on the outskirts of the city. During the arrest, he resisted fiercely, managing to wound one of the police officers. During interrogation, the suspect behaved defiantly. At first, he claimed to have nothing to do with the crime and that it was the first time he had ever seen the deceased girl. Then he began denying his very presence in the park that day, and when shown the surveillance camera footage, he abruptly fell silent and demanded a lawyer. The prosecutor promptly charged Zion Teasley with formal charges of intentional murder and kidnapping. Among the weighty evidence were surveillance recordings, Lauren's personal belongings found in the suspect's garage, the murder weapon, DNA traces and fingerprints found at the crime scene. The court ruled on a pre-trial detention measure without the possibility of bail. The trial of Zion Teasley began on June 5, 2023. It was one of the most high-profile crimes in the state's history. The entire country closely followed the proceedings. Crowds of reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens thronged outside the courthouse. Everyone wanted to see in person the person who committed such a heinous murder. Zion was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs under heavy escort. He wore an orange prison jumpsuit, and an indifferent expression was frozen on his face. In contrast, Lauren's loved ones did not restrain their emotions. Her mother wept inconsolably. Her father cast angry glances at the defendant. Friends of the deceased were also present in the courtroom, holding her photographs. In his opening statement, the prosecutor made every effort to convince the jury that Zion Teasley was a cruel and cynical killer who posed a significant threat to society. He placed particular emphasis on the audacious nature of the crime and the numerous pieces of evidence that testified against the defendant. According to the prosecutor, Zion was a psychopath who harbored hatred toward women and derived pleasure from inflicting pain on them. Teasley's defense attorney, for his part, tried to prove his client's innocence. He called into question the evidence provided, suggesting that someone else could have been Lauren's killer. The defender urged the jury not to succumb to emotions and public pressure, but to be guided solely by the facts. He also mentioned Zion's difficult childhood and the abuse he had suffered at the hands of his closest relatives. At present, Zion William Teasley has been charged with first-degree intentional homicide. In December 2023, the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office filed a motion to seek the death penalty against the defendant, as prescribed by Arizona state law for particularly serious crimes. The Phoenix Police Department officially announced the completion of the investigation, and the transfer of the case materials to court for prosecution of the suspect. There is currently no information to indicate that the attack on Lauren Heyke was anything other than a random victim selection by the perpetrator. Zion Teasley himself continues to deny any involvement in this brutal murder. He remains in custody without bail. The trial is scheduled for October 2025. It is expected to be one of the most high-profile trials in Arizona history. The tragic death of Lauren Heyke has stunned all of America, truly shocking her family and friends. A young woman who so loved life and believed in goodness was killed by a brutal murderer for absolutely no reason. This crime has once again reminded society of the importance of public safety and timely response to troubling signs of disturbed behavior in individuals. Lauren's story has also demonstrated how crucial coordinated work by law enforcement is. It was thanks to the prompt and professional actions of the police that they were able to quickly get on the trail of the suspect, apprehend him, and collect substantial evidence of guilt. Ahead lies the high-profile trial of this case, which is set to put a final period and determine the punishment for the killer. Society hopes for a fair sentence and the most severe punishment for the perpetrator. But most importantly, the bright memory of Lauren Heyke must live on in the hearts of all who knew and loved this wonderful girl. She will forever remain young, beautiful, kind, and sincere. Let her sad story serve as a warning to everyone. Cherish life, be cautious, and do not remain indifferent to those around you.